Frozen crystals descended from the heavens like flowers sifted through celestial fingers. Margaret Stone stepped down from the shuddering locomotive onto the weathered boards of Razor Creek Station, Wyoming. Her leather boots struck the icy planks with hollow thuds. Bitter wind swept across the endless prairie beyond, whipping beneath her heavy woolen dress and cutting through every fiber of her traveling coat. One gloved hand gripped a worn satchel, while the other clutched a twice-folded letter, edges worn soft from handling. She stood waiting. The great iron beast groaned once more before departing, steel wheels grinding against frozen rails as it vanished into the pearl-white distance. Margaret remained alone on the empty platform, sheltered only by the rough timber overhang, as ice crystals gathered on her hat's brim. No gentleman in a fine overcoat awaited her with fresh blooms. No wooden sign displayed her name in careful script. No friendly voice called out Miss Stone across the railroad yard. The correspondence she held bore the signature: J. Crawford, sent from Razor Creek 8 weeks past. The handwriting had been clumsy yet earnest, filled with hopeful words. I work hard and live clean. I have good land. I need a woman with courage and gentle ways. Should you accept, there will be a place for you here. Your solitary days will end. Yet as twilight settled over the distant hills and no soul appeared, Margaret's breathing grew shallow. The letter had offered no true pledge. It had been deception, perhaps mere jest. She understood naturally in her heart's depths. She had always understood. She hadn't boarded that westbound train seeking matrimony. She had come to vanish entirely. Chicago had become suffocating with rumors. Since the merchant's daughter had disappeared his 6-year-old child, last witnessed in her nursery with Margaret, present her reputation had curdled like abandoned cream. The child had evaporated without leaving any clues. Margaret had endured endless questioning, then dismissal without formal accusations. No vindication offered, yet the stares never grew warmer. She'd been pursued by doubt's phantom ever after. She required distance, somewhere to become nobody. And that correspondence from J. Crawford had arrived at precisely the needed moment. She refolded the paper, buried it deep in her coat's inner pocket. Wind had chapped her cheeks raw. Her lips felt split and tender. She turned toward the weak lamplight glowing from the town's main thoroughfare and took her first step forward when a tiny voice froze her entirely. "Are you going to be my mama?" Margaret spun around sharply. A small girl stood barely an arm's length away, wrapped in a coat several sizes beyond her frame. Heavy boots dragged through the muddy ice, cheeks glowing crimson as winter berries. Brown hair peeked from beneath her knitted cap, soft tendrils framing her small face. She held a crumpled sheet of paper in one mittened fist, some sort of sketch, her steady, expectant gaze fixed upon Margaret. "What was that you said?" Margaret asked, her voice fracturing. The child cocked her head slightly. "You arrived on the evening train." "That's exactly what I wished for." Before Margaret could respond, heavy footsteps struck the wooden platform behind them. A man's voice, harsh and weary, sliced through the howling wind. "She's not your mother, child." Margaret turned once more. The man standing there possessed broad shoulders beneath a coat mended at both sleeves. A thick woolen scarf wound high against winter's bite. His dark brown hair lay cropped short under a battered hat, and a neat beard outlined a jaw that had endured too many sleepless, troubled nights. His gray eyes, cold and guarded, studied her briefly before shifting to the girl. "Rose," he said firmly. The little girl blinked up at him. "She resembles someone who might be." "That's not how the world operates," Margaret tightened her hold on the satchel, uncertain whether she should speak or flee. The man regarded her with a look that held no cruelty, or only bone-deep exhaustion. "You're the woman who came seeking Crawford?" he asked. She swallowed hard. "Yes, I am." He scratched behind his neck. "Well, that would be me. James Crawford." "And I never sent you any letter?" Her stomach plummeted. "I believe perhaps someone, maybe one of the clerks from the trading post, borrowed my name and decided to play matchmaker without permission. It wouldn't be this town's first cruel joke." He glanced past her shoulder at the falling snow. "But since you're stranded here with nowhere else to turn, I won't abandon you to freeze in the streets." Margaret hesitated. "I didn't come here to ensnare you in any obligation, never claimed you did." He pivoted and began walking. "If you need shelter tonight, come along. It's not a far walk." The girl rose, reached up and grasped Margaret's unoccupied hand without any hesitation. "You're shivering," she observed, "but your fingers feel warm." Margaret allowed the child to lead her forward. The townspeople observed from behind ice-glazed windows. Lanterns burned dimly from the general store, the blacksmith's forge, the tavern further down the road. A woman standing in a doorway whispered something to a man puffing on his pipe. Another elderly woman squinted through the darkness and muttered, "Never seen a bride who looked like that. Appears to be nothing but trouble brewing." James Crawford's dwelling stood at the town's far boundary, beyond the chapel and the abandoned grain mill. It was modest, featuring a slanted roof half buried under snow and a porch that groaned beneath their weight. A single oil flame flickered behind one window. He pushed open the door. "It's not much to speak of, but it stays dry. There's soup warming on the stove. You can remain one night. Only one." The interior was austere timber walls, cast iron heater, 2 wooden chairs, a narrow bed tucked in the corner, a low table scattered with various implements. Rose climbed atop a blanket-covered chest, unwinding her scarf. Margaret remained close to the entrance, unsure whether to sit or run. James gestured toward the bed. "That's yours. I'll sleep in the storage shed. I'll keep the door partially open, just to be safe." She studied his face. "I don't require protection." He paused thoughtfully. "Neither do I." When he closed the door behind him, the wind shrieked even louder than before. Margaret sank onto the narrow bed, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The lamp created dancing shadows on the walls. Snow tapped against the glass. The child hummed softly from her corner of the room. Margaret drew the satchel closer, retrieved the folded correspondence from her coat, and examined it once more. She hadn't journeyed here to become anyone's wife. Yet here she found herself in a stranger's home with a child who had asked for a mother and a man who appeared to have forgotten what faith even meant. She tucked the letter beneath her pillow and lay down fully clothed, boots still laced tight. The door remained ajar through the night, wide enough to admit the cold, but not wide enough to permit escape. By dawn, snow had crystallized against the windows and frozen the front door's hinges solid. A pale silence blanketed the settlement, but inside Crawford's house, the quiet didn't feel restful. It felt like an unhealed wound that no one dared tend. Margaret stirred from the bed, boots still secured, shoulders aching from curling defensively all night. Rose was already conscious, sitting cross-legged on the rough floor with a charcoal stub and a torn page from an old catalog. She sketched with the deliberate focus of someone capturing memory rather than fantasy. "You're awake," the girl said simply. Margaret sat upright, blinking away sleep. "Barely so." Rose examined her drawing. "You speak words in your dreams, as do you," Margaret murmured. The child smiled briefly, then grew serious again. She added something dark to her page's corner, what appeared to be a shadow with reaching fingers. Margaret rubbed her tired eyes and stood. "Your father works in the shed, I assume, mending damaged traps." Perhaps Rose nodded. The house consisted of simple construction for walls enclosing one main room, a lean-to for meal preparation, and a closet-sized back area James used for storage. It was rough, but not unloved. The walls stood bare except for a set of dented tin plates and a single photograph, faded and water-stained, showing a woman cradling an infant before this very house. The woman's features were mostly lost to time's passage. The house had once known warmth. Now it echoed with emptiness. The settlement stirred to life with groaning cartwheels and shovels scraping ice from wooden steps. Margaret ventured outside to draw water and met hostile stares. From across the street, a man leaning against a fence post turned his head and spat. A woman near the trading post nudged her companion with urgent whispers. She caught only the final words, "Attractive enough." But they always are. Back inside, she attempted to ignore the implications. But such things clung like smoke to clothing as the day progressed. Rose produced a wooden container filled with folded pages, each one a drawing. Some crude, some peculiar, but most disturbingly detailed. "These are your creations?" Margaret asked. Rose nodded. When I don't want to lose something from memory, I put it on paper. She held up one sheet. Margaret's blood chilled. The image depicted a woman being pulled away by two dark figures. Her arms stretched backward, mouth opened in mid-scream, while a house burned in the background. To the side, in childish but careful lettering, a smaller version of Rose watched from behind a wooden barrier. It's a nightmare, Rose said quietly, but I believe it actually happened. Margaret's fingers trembled as she accepted the page. When did these dreams begin? After Mama disappeared, Margaret's throat constricted. What became of your mother? Rose didn't respond. She gazed toward the corner photograph. That evening, as wind howled through gaps in the walls, James finally spoke. He avoided Margaret's eyes when he said it. The house caught fire to winter's past. Wind knocked over the lantern. I was up on the ridge tracking a wolf that had been destroying my trap lines. When I returned, flames had consumed the back room. He stopped speaking momentarily. She was gone. I never discovered a body. Nothing but a locket and her shoes near the doorway. Do you believe she died? Margaret asked gently. He looked at her then. I think something took her, and the fire concealed the evidence. It was the longest speech he'd made since her arrival that night. Unable to find sleep, Margaret paced the small kitchen area. She lit a candle stub and ran her fingertips along the edges of the built-in shelving near the fireplace. Dust gathered in the corners, and the wood had warped in places from heat and age. Then she felt a strange texture beneath her fingers, carved design in the side panel, nearly invisible in the dim light. She leaned closer and wiped away the accumulated grime. There it was, a blade crossed with an oak branch. Her blood turned to ice water. It was identical to the symbol etched on the wooden charm the missing girl in Chicago had worn, a pendant her father claimed was crafted by the children's home that had taken her in. The same symbol that had appeared on shipping crates marked for transport in the warehouse district. The same she'd glimpsed painted faintly on the corner of the abandoned school building. Elle shuddered and silent. Why was it here? She stepped back and extinguished the candle. Something connected her past to this settlement. Now she wasn't merely hiding anymore. She was searching. The following morning, she passed the seamstress shop on her way to the well. The door creaked open, and a piercing voice called out, Miss Stone. Margaret turned. A heavy-set woman with measuring tape draped around her neck and overly rouged cheeks leaned in the doorway. I heard you arrived on the train seeking James Crawford. You should know, he used to be quite desirable before he forgot how to show joy. Margaret attempted a smile. I'm not here pursuing anyone's affections. The woman sniffed dismissively. Well, people say you traveled all the way from Chicago with a satchel and a lie. Some of us have spent our entire lives here. We can detect trouble approaching. Margaret said nothing, but she recognized the gleam in the woman's eyes. Kind of venom born from boredom and wounded pride. She returned to the house with her stomach clenched tight. Rose was waiting with a fresh drawing. It showed a woman standing in snow, holding hands with a small child, while a shadow observed from a window behind them. That's you, Rose said. Margaret looked up. And for the first time since stepping off that train, she didn't feel completely invisible. But she definitely felt observed. She was no longer merely a stranger. She had become a question, and someone somewhere in Razor Creek didn't want that question answered. Margaret first encountered Ezra Whitmore on a cold Thursday morning, and he wore a smile that failed to reach his eyes. He approached her outside the trading post, boots crushing gravel underfoot. Snow had melted into brown muck along the roadway, and the sun accomplished little more than brightening the frigid. Ere Margaret had ventured out with Rose to purchase lamp oil and flour. And there he stood, hat tilted at the perfect angle, coat immaculate, gloves like silk against the town's roughness. Miss Stone, I believe, he said, voice flowing smooth as a river concealing dangerous currents beneath. Folks tell me you've been spending time with that Crawford fellow. Spending time with his daughter, Margaret corrected. He chuckled softly. Fair point. I understand you once worked as an educator. My little girl could benefit from proper instruction. She's intelligent, but unruly, No one in this settlement knows how to teach a girl with a keen mind. Margaret held his gaze steadily. I'm not seeking employment. His smile widened, but something in his eyes grew sharper. Sometimes employment seeks you. Razor Creek is small, Miss Stone. We all exist under the same sky. And sometimes we must keep our allies close and our decisions closer. Margaret smiled politely and nodded. But when she and Rose walked away, the hair on her neck remained raised for 3 full blocks. That night she wrote on the back of an old book cover, Ezra Whitmore's mild deceiving. Knows too much. She began observing. Not obviously she wasn't foolish, but she lingered near the general store when he rode through town. She tracked which buildings his men visited regularly. She noticed a pattern. Men who drank on his payroll, departed with sealed containers, and returned subdued. She also observed how no one sustained eye contact with him for long. Meanwhile, Rose fell sick. It began with congestion, then coughing, and by week's end, she lay shivering beneath 2 quilts, cheeks burning fever red. Muttering in her sleep, Margaret cooled the girl's forehead with cloths dipped in vinegar water, whispering soothingly to calm her. One night, as the fire burned low, Rose moaned something that froze Margaret completely. They took Mama because Papa refused them. Margaret leaned closer. Who took her child? Rose rolled to her side. The man with the silver badge? They loaded her into a cart. I witnessed it. I never told anyone. I thought it was just a dream. Margaret sat with her until morning, heart racing with the realization that Rose hadn't dreamed it. She had witnessed it. She brewed James a bitter tea and insisted he rest while she remained with Rose. He nodded. Exhaustion had darkened the skin beneath his eyes. The house grew quiet as snow fell once more. Then came the flames. It occurred just past midnight. Margaret had dozed beside Rose, wrapped in a shawl near the stove, when the sound of shattering glass jolted her awake. Fire licked across the far wall before her feet touched the floor. Smoke filled the room like water in a sinking vessel. Rose. She screamed, lifting the child from the bed. The girl coughed and clung to her as Margaret threw open the front door. A second explosion came from behind the oil shelves. Heat burst against her back, but she held Rose tight and ran barefoot into the snow. Neighbors came running, too late. The fire consumed the roof within minutes. James arrived shortly after, having been out tracking a rogue wolf beyond the ridge. His eyes widened with panic when he saw Margaret curled in the snow, Rose pressed against her chest, both their faces blackened with soot. Is she? She's breathing, Margaret gasped. James looked up at the burning house. Then he knelt, covered his face, and remained there long after the fire died. 3 days later, they stood among the ashes. Charred beams protruded like broken bones from the foundation. Snow blanketed the black remains. Steam rising faintly where heat had yet to surrender. Rose stayed with a widow across town, recovering. Margaret searched through the wreckage, gloved hands trembling. Something had drawn her here, beneath the remains of a cedar shelf. She found it a silver pendant, twisted from heat but still intact, and on its surface, blackened and half-melted. Was the blade an oak branch symbol she had first seen in Chicago? She brought it to James that evening as they huddled in a barn offered by a sympathetic neighbor. He stared at the symbol for a long time. I've seen that before, he murmured. Margaret's voice was barely audible. So have I.